Welcome back. Not doing more to stop the spread of COVID early in the pandemic was one of the UK's worst ever public health failures. That's the view of MPs in a report published today. There was a delay in the first lockdown, they say, because the government and its scientific advisors tried to manage the situation and, in effect, achieve herd immunity by infection. Remember that old taboo? The report does, though, highlight the success of the vaccination rollout, and it acknowledges that the government was dealing with the biggest peacetime challenge for a century. Well, I'm joined now by Philip Thomas, risk management expert and visiting professor at the University of Bristol. Do you think the MPs have identified the correct failings?
I think they have answered the wrong question. Or they've answered the right question too early, perhaps I should say, to be more exact. I think that the problem is that they have looked at one side of the picture only, and that's the one very important part, which is the number of deaths that COVID has caused. But there is the other side of it, which is the number of deaths, the amount of loss of life we will experience as a result of having such a very, very deep recession, which is a sort of 300 years, hasn't been such a large recession, such a big dip, and we're still trying to climb out of it nearly 2 years later. And put simply, poverty costs lives and a recession costs lives.
In terms of, I imagine we're alluding to lockdowns here especially, and sort of grinding the economy to a halt, pressing that big old stop button on the Prime Minister's desk every time that the SAGE group said, you know, that our numbers are creeping up again. Is that what you think was mismanaging the situation? Do you think potentially that actually allowing potentially, you know, healthy people to go out and get infected in the early stages of this pandemic might have been a better approach?
Well, there are two things. It's what you know at the time, what you can say at the time, and then what you can do at the time, and then sort of in the absolute sense. But as far as I think the first thing is everyone needs to realise that we may find in the next few years that we've lost more life as a result of the measures we've taken in order to combat COVID than we could possibly have gained. We're already seeing the economic effects of very significant disruption at the moment, and we're doing that when we have now a huge debt burden, which is the largest that we have had for 50, 60 years. So we're not in a good place to actually combat those problems. Now then, so the first thing is to realise that, and then think, what should you be doing? And indeed, as you say, the R rate is something that you can look at and see if you can do your best to control that. And that doesn't mean driving it down as far as possible, which is basically what happened in the lockdowns. What it means is trying to manage that so that you actually have an optimal result.
In terms of, it's always much easier to look back on a situation and determine what would have been the best course of action, and very different when you're right in the thick of things. But in terms of, you know, let's wind the clocks back to January. We find out that there's an emergent novel coronavirus in China. What do you think the government should have done from that point?
Well, I'm not sure that you can really judge these things to a week, which is the suggestion. I'm not sure the models are that accurate, But I think that when one realised that, what one should have, I actually published a paper at the end of March, and it was covered by the Times on the 24th of March, pointing out that keeping a very long lockdown in position could have this effect of costing more lives than it saved. I think that needed to be taken on board. I don't think it has been taken on board. once you take that on board, then your next port of call is to have a look at how you can control the epidemic in the best way. And one of the things that the SAGE scientists did not do was they did not produce the R rate in a timely fashion. It's still published with a delay of between 2 and 3 weeks, which makes it essentially useless as a control tool. As a control engineer, I know that you need to have rapid feedback, and that enables you to get good control of any process. It can actually be measured, and if you look at the Spectator, they've been carrying my measurements of it since for about the last year. The method was developed in October last year, so for about a year. And you can actually get the R rate in 4 days, and that does enable you then to take judgments on what you should be doing, rather more refined judgments than we've actually seen.
Most countries in the world followed a similar modus operandi. Sweden was always sort of elevated as the one that marched to a different tune. Do you think everybody's got this wrong? And do you think, this report that's come out from MPs, it's almost predictable in its conclusions. It seems to sort of be rewinding the clock back to those press conferences and the questions coming from journalists against the government. Given that it seems that aerials don't seem very tuned to wanting to hear that lockdowns were dangerous, does that then concern you for how we might handle this sort of thing next time round?
Yes, it does. There are two things. The most obvious one is that you can't guarantee that the next crisis is going to look like significantly like the one we have at the moment. So that's the first thing. But I think the general point after that is to get as much rapid information as possible. That's the first thing. So if you can get something within a few days rather than a few weeks, that's going to be very beneficial to how you can control it and the options that you allow yourself. You need to have more ambition on that. I think that one of the things that SAGE did, it had a complete lack of ambition on what could be done as far as helping quite close real-time control. So I think that's the first thing that I would say is try to get more information. And I think one of the other things is that there's a need to get a greater diversity. I think that's one of the things that the MPs came up with, and they wanted to go abroad for their information. But if they actually got a similar set of epidemiologists from abroad, and modelers from abroad, I think they might have come up with similar ideas. I think it needs a broader spectrum. I didn't see economists on SAGE. Economists, there's an economic problem that it feeds into very directly, and I think that needed to be taken into account, and would need to be taken into account in a future big disease problem.
Philip, I could pick your brains on this subject all day, but alas, we do not have that luxury. Thank you for coming on the programme today, and let's pick up this discussion again in the future. It's fascinating stuff.